We are joined by someone who's tracked GST for years. He was part of Arun Jaitley's original team that brought in GST in 2017. Arvind Subramaniam, former chief economic advisor, one of the country's leading economists, joins me. Appreciate your joining us, Mr. Subramaniam. Thank you very much for taking out the time. I'm going to ask question by question and you can break it down for our viewers. I know you've been writing about this. My first big question, do we finally have, Dr. Subramaniam, a good and simple tax? Is this exactly what you wanted all these years? You couldn't do it in 2017. You've got it now, just two major tax brackets.
Yeah. First of all, Rajiv, thanks for having me on the show. Great to be here. The kind of simple answer to your question is that the GST, by eliminating the 28% slab, which never deserved to be there in the first place, and by reducing taxes on a number of items, the tax has become more good and more simple. It hasn't become the perfect good and simple tax. Certainly, lots of tax cuts which will benefit the middle class. I think eliminating the high tax on cement will, I think, boost production. So on the whole, a terrific effort to take the GST one step closer to what many of us would desire to be a really good and simple tax, but we're still some ways away from reaching that goal.
What would it take for that? Since you're saying we'll be still some, what is it that needs now to be done to really make it a good and simple tax? I recall before the reforms came, you had put out an article saying it wasn't just 3 rates, there were numerous rates. Of course, famously how popcorn between salted and caramel had 3 different rates. What would you like to see happen next to make it truly a good and simple tax?
I think, first of all, Rajdeep, as you said, and as my colleagues and I wrote, on the face of it, it seems like there are 2 slabs or 3 slabs, the 0, the 5, and the 18. But in practice, there are, especially if you take the cesses, there are many, many more slabs. Even outside of the cesses, there, for example, you have a 1% GST without ITC. You have a 5% GST without ITC for restaurants and 18% with ITC. The composition, which applies to small traders, you have multiple rates for them. And then, so the multiplicity is still there. There are still lots of cesses. We don't know how the tax rates, the cess rates on the goods, on the sin goods will be simplified. There's still some duty inversion where taxes on outputs are still lower than taxes on inputs. As you said, there's the popcorn problem. There are things like, taxes depending upon the end use. I mean, if you use it a certain way, there's a certain tax. If you don't use it a certain way, a certain tax. And then even there are taxes based on, what goes into it. If it's based on wood, furniture is taxed a certain item. If it's not good. So there's still a lot of complexity that needs to be addressed. And I think that should be the next stage of making it a truly good and simple tax.
At least popcorn now is uniformly at 5%, whether you buy salted caramel, packaged or loose. But let's come to the next question, Dr. Subramaniam. What specific measures need to be taken to ensure that businesses pass on the benefit of rate cuts to consumers? There's a concern that will businessmen automatically transfer benefits to consumers? What's your view on that?
I think, in many of these cases, my sense is that the tax rates have been sizable enough that they will be passed on to consumers. I think the second thing to note, Rajdeep, is that if you believe that the economy is soft, then the incentive for producers to actually reduce prices and pass on these tax cuts, I think the incentives will be strong. So I think we should let it play itself out. And I think what we shouldn't have is some heavy-handed intervention, to force people, producers and traders to reduce prices. I think you should trust in the fact that there have been large cuts, and hope that given the state of the economy, that these cuts will be passed on to consumers. So no preemptive, heavy-handed action.
Okay, let's turn to the third question, and you partly raised that in your original answer as well. How will the revenue loss of approximately 48,000 crores, and this is only one figure that's been thrown around, be managed by the center? The fear, of course, is that there will be a huge revenue loss. Will this affect fiscal deficit numbers? Will it affect the revenues of states? How do you believe this will be managed by the center? Will we see more cesses is one concern.
So I think, Rajdeep, that's a very good question. I think there is a lot of uncertainty about what the revenue consequences will be. But I think we should break this up into what will be the revenue consequences for the country as a whole, and what will be the consequences for the states. I think that the government has put out some number like 48,000 crores or whatever. Maybe that's only a half-year estimate. But I think if you look at any reasonable estimate of what has happened in terms of the tax cuts and use that to project something for the year as a whole, and remember, this is the key point, that if you consider the whole, GST and cesses, what is happening to the whole kitty, our own estimate is that something like 1.5 to 2 lakh crores will be the loss on an annual basis for the overall kitty. Now, that's a little bit higher than what I think the government is projecting. But I mean, this depends upon some assumptions. But I think mota, 1.5 to 2 lakh crores for the kitty as a whole. Now, of course, some of this is going to depend upon what the government is going to do to the sin goods. Are the cesses going to go up? Are they going to remain the same? Are going to come down? But that's roughly the order of magnitude. So there will be a loss overall to the GST kitty. And I think what everyone should realize is that pre-GST, the overall kitty was something like 6.1 to 6.2% of GDP. When all these reforms are played out, that will be closer to 5.25, 5.5. So over 10 years, the overall GST kitty has led or will lead to a loss. And that will affect the fiscal situation of the country as a whole on a permanent basis, which I think we'll all have to grapple with. So that's the first point. The second point is what's going to happen to the states. Now, if the overall kitty comes down, you would think that the states will also face a thing. But the government has argued, and many people are arguing, that no, the states will not lose out. And they are not wrong, because what they're comparing it is with the current situation. In the current situation, just to give viewers a sense, we are taking in about 5.9% of GDP overall kitty. Of that, about 0.4% is raised from the cess. At the moment, the cess is neither going to the center nor going to the states. Basically, the center is collecting it and paying off the loans. So at the moment, the states are getting something like 2.25, 2.5% of GDP. Going forward, they could actually retain that amount. And so it seems like the states are not going to lose. But if you look at it in the broader context of what they were getting pre-GST, because the overall kitty is coming down, they will also face probably a hit relative to that. And that's why they've expressed some anxieties about, their position needs to be safeguarded.
Let me come to my next question, and this is a challenge that you must have faced even when you all unveiled GST in 2017, but also today. How does one ensure better compliance and administration of GST? There is a fear, and I hear it all the time, of the Inspector Raj that has come in. Too many forms originally, now the government claims they are simplifying it. Do you believe that more needs to be done to ensure compliance and administration of GST? Looking at input tax, you mentioned how if I'm in the furniture business, there are lots of input costs involved, and sometimes the GST inspector will use that to harass me And that's exactly what's been happening.
Yeah, I think, Rajiv, that's a really fair and good question. I think one should separate out two things. I think the more simple the tax becomes, the better compliance will be, and less the discretion and arbitrary enforcement of the tax authorities. So, in that sense, what has happened with these recent reforms is a step in the right direction. But I think almost separate from that, there is a whole history and background of the tax inspector Raj. I think that's a much bigger issue. And I would, in fact, argue that post GST, that has become marginally worse, as it were. Something about the GST has made tax authorities, and by the way, here the culprits are as much state governments as state tax authorities as central tax authorities. I think something about the GST has maybe made it more legitimate in the eyes of tax authorities to go after, the common man, the small and medium trader. It's a much bigger problem, Rajdeep. Some of it aggravated by GST, hopefully some of it attenuated by the recent simplicity. But I think tax authorities in India need to look much more broadly at themselves and say, how do we get rid of this harassment, especially of the small and medium trader? It's something that I think we really need to focus much more on that.
My next question is partly political, but will the GST rate rationalization fully offset the impact of Trump tariffs? Now, the finance minister says this rate cut has nothing to do with Trump tariffs, but it seems too much of a coincidence. Do you believe, though, that it puts us in a better position with these rate cuts to offset the impact of Trump tariffs?
Rajdeep, my own view is that these GST tax cuts will maybe give a modest boost to the economy in the short run, right? The Indian problem, the malaise of the Indian economy is much deeper and structural. If one wanted to summarize it, it would be, why is private investment, domestic and foreign, so weak and has been so weak for a very long time? The GST reform, while desirable, I don't think it's going to seriously address the bigger problem that India faces. How do we boost private investment? And of course, now that weak environment has been aggravated by the Trump tariff shock. So while the GST reforms are desirable, welcome, they will not really solve this more serious problems of the weak private investment and the Trump tariff shock. That requires much more serious structural reform, which I hope the government will embrace seriously. As you know, there's a deregulation commission. I hope we'll have new ideas on that. But I think, but let me just say, Rajdeep, one last point I think I would like to tell viewers. When we think about what the government needs to do for reform, I think there's an equally big agenda on what the government should not do in terms of this, whether it's the arbitrary enforcement, whether it's the tax terrorism, whether it's, favoring some at the expense of others. There's a lot of a, do no harm agenda as much as a do more good agenda.
Very interestingly put there, Arvind Subramaniam. My next question, is there an urgent need for bringing petroleum in the near future under GST, and how will states be compensated for the potential revenue loss?
Rajiv, great question. And I have actually changed my views on this over the last 5 years. I used to be a big proponent of saying, let's get petroleum into the GST, let's get electricity in the GST. I mean, I'm still theoretically in favor, but having seen the experience of the last 5-6 years, where the states' fiscal sovereignty was to some extent taken away by the GST, the hope was that the revenue performance would be so good and the center would also behave in a spirit of cooperative federalism. Now, I think I'm afraid to say that both the revenue performance and the overall, spirit of cooperative federalism has not been as strong as it used to be. Therefore, to ask the states to say give up more sovereignty by bringing petroleum into the GST is a tough sell and a tough ask, and it's not something I think the climate is right to further narrow states' fiscal sovereignty. So on that score, I would not be in favor of bringing petroleum into the GST.
I have a final question for you, and this is as someone who was part of the original team under Mr. Jaitley who brought GST in place. I had Mr. P. Chidambaram on my show only yesterday, and he said that it's come 8 years too late. Do you believe that much of this could have been done much earlier? I often wonder why was health and life insurance, for example, under GST? It could have easily been zero, which is what's happened today. How would you respond to that? Was it simply something that was waiting to be done a long time ago, or is it der aaye durust aaye, we have finally at least taken the incremental steps forward?
I think, Rajdeep, as in most cases, both your statements are true. It's both. This should have been done 8 years ago and done. I still feel at the moment of conception was the big opportunity that we lost to really make it a good and simple GST. But
why didn't it happen? Why didn't it happen? As someone who was an insider, why didn't it happen then? Why were you all unable to bring a good and simple tax 8 years ago?
I think, Rajdeep, I hate to be self-referential, but my book Off Council has, it's partly political and partly. I wish, or to be a bit honest, I wish the leadership had been convinced of the need for simplicity and lack of complexity at that stage. I think they were less, convinced by it, and I wish they had been more. But let's not also forget, as you said, der aaye, but at least now we've done it. Better late than never. I think if you do the counterfactual as today versus 5 years from now. It should have been done 8 years ago, but better today than never, better today than 5 years ago, 5 years later.
Arvind Subramaniam, great to have you on the show. You've got a major book coming out next month. We hope to get you on that and look at the overall trajectory of Indian reform over the years. Often reform in this country is done by stealth. And either way, it is a step forward. Is it as big a step forward as is being made out to be? I think that we'll wait and see. As you've rightly pointed out, there are still many gaps that still need to be filled in. But I appreciate you taking the time off and joining us on the show tonight. Thank you very much.
Rajdeep, great to be on the show. Thanks very much for having me. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, good. Good to have one of the finest voices on the economy speaking to us there, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam.